Well, hi. I'm pretty excited to be here, but it being in Dallas is an extra bonus for me because I have family here. So that meant that yesterday, after we did sound check, I was able to spend some time with my nieces, who are 7 and 9. So I went over there in the afternoon. I got there before their parents got home, so it was just me and the girls hanging out. Now, their home, like I'm sure many of your homes, has a rule about screen time. The kids are only allowed so much. It's about 20 minutes. And I'm sitting there with the girls. They're playing on their iPad, and they had set up the time limit function. And so the time limit comes up. They can no longer use the app. And the 7-year-old, she looks at this notification preventing her from watching whatever she's watching. She looks up at me, and she goes, "You know, Uncle Teddy, I'm just going to open a different app." And she did. And she did. She went and she opened, I think she was watching YouTube. She opened Netflix. She watched it for 20 more minutes, and when that one she couldn't watch anymore, what did she do? She opened another one. It's not my house. It's not my rules. So I'm not there policing this thing. I'm just so fascinated watching how her brain is working through this. And as I said to her, I said, "You're a hacker." Right? Like, this is what hackers do. Hackers look at systems and they say, how can I remove the barriers that are in my way? How do I get rid of the things that are preventing me from doing what I want to do? Are you Lily? I'll tell you how to do it later. All right, cool. Sorry, my bad. He's like, dude, I just introduced you, now you're corrupting my kid. So that was fun to spend some time with them. So let me pose a question to you. What's the worst thing that can happen? Now, of course, I'm asking that question on the heels of a very whimsical story about an adorable little girl doing something that has no harm to anybody. But actually think about that question for a minute. Think about it in the context of your own business or your industry. Or think about it in the context of the companies that you do business with. What's the worst thing that can happen? Now, that is a question that ethical hackers and the bad kind of hackers ask every single day. You might already be familiar with the idea of the malicious types of hackers, the entities who cause news headlines because every day they're attacking companies and schools, hospitals, governments, and more. But you might not be familiar with their opposing force, ethical hackers. Ethical hackers use all the same tools, techniques, approaches, and methods as the bad kind of hackers. But they do so in order to improve the security of systems rather than to exploit those systems. That's the world that I come from. As this kind of incredible video just described, I lead a group of ethical hackers. And we hack things for a living. And we've hacked everything from cars to phones, medical devices, password managers, dating apps. That was kind of an interesting one. IoT devices, your router at home, we hack it all. And I can tell you from this experience that the path to how you can build better, more secure systems is when we think like a hacker. So let me explain this idea in the context of how software gets hacked. So I mentioned that I lead this group of ethical hackers, the good guy hackers, and one of my hackers came to me at one point, and he was really excited about this research that he was doing on cryptocurrency wallets. Now, whether you're into cryptocurrency or not isn't really important. If you are, it has to do with Ethereum wallets. The important point is it has to do with how systems stay secure. And that has to do with what are called keys. So keys are essentially what keep a system secure. And this individual came to me. He was really, really excited about this finding that he had. And he said, "Ted, I was able to successfully predict the keys." Now, I'm from the field, so I understood why that was significant. But because I knew it was significant, I knew he was going to be talking to the media about this. I knew he was going to be on stages talking about it. So I wanted to press him to help me understand it in the simplest way possible. And so I said, why does that matter? Why does my mom care about that? He said, well, because the main function, or one of the main functions that keeps all systems secure, including cryptocurrency wallets, is that keys are unpredictable. You can't guess them. And I pushed him again, and I said, explain unpredictability. And he said, he thought about it for a second, he sort of scratches his chin. And he said, imagine it like this. You go to the beach, you pick up a grain of sand, and you throw it back. And then the next day, I go to the same beach, and I pick up a grain of sand. How likely is it that I pick up your grain? And I said what probably many of you are thinking right now, which is, that sounds pretty impossible. And he said, exactly. Except now, multiply that by every beach on Earth, and multiply that by like a gazillion planet Earths. That gives you the scale of how unlikely it is that someone could guess the key. And then he paused for dramatic effect, and he said, but I just did it 732 times. That's bonkers. That's like he walked in the middle of the Sahara Desert and 732 times picked up the grain of sand that I threw there. It should not be possible at all. So how did he do it? Here's what he did. So any system will fail at some point. It will run into some error. And when an error happens, there's a process that any system has for how it deals with that error. So what he did was he looked at how the system handles errors. He found a small piece of information in that process that he could then use that piece of information in order to successfully predict keys. That's creative. That's what hackers do. Hackers are contrarian. They look at a system and they think about it differently than the people who are building it. They're committed, they have a goal, they're motivated to pursue that goal, and they're creative. And if we're trying to build things that are going to be resilient against attack from hackers, we need to think like them. So I'm going to try to do two things today to help you. The first is I'm going to help you think about how we have to change our mind when it comes to how do we deal with hackers. And then I'm going to help you think about how can we now change our behaviors. And if we do the combination of those things, then we can build better, more secure systems. This frustrates a lot of people because they're like, I don't want to talk about my mindset. Just tell me what to do. Give me the list of things that I should have. Should I use unique passwords? Should I enable multi-factor authentication? Yes, you should. But you can't change behavior until you change your mind, because we can't achieve any goal until our mind's in the right place. And the way that most people think about security actually is somewhat backwards. So let's talk about how we change our mind first. The first misconception when it comes to the way that we think about security is that people often think like defenders, right? I'm trying to keep the bad guys out. But that's not how to do it. Instead, what we need to do is we need to think like the attacker. We need to think like a hacker. For any of you who are interested in really any sports, think about what the relationship is between a defender and, say, the striker. If we think about soccer as an example, right? The striker is moving towards the goal, and the defenders typically move backpedaling towards the goal. And if that defender is on their heels, they are not going to be able to pivot as the striker is changing direction. So we need to think like the striker. We need to think about how do we change directions. Some of you might be hackers, actually. Have you ever stood in a line and wondered if there was a way to not stand in that line? Have you ever wondered if there was another way to enter whatever the venue is you're waiting in line for? I mean, I certainly have. I had this moment a few years ago when I was standing in line at a bar for a friend's birthday party. And I had to go to this bar because that's where all my friends were. It's not like I could go to another one. But the problem was there was this super long line to get into the bar. I just didn't want to wait in that line, to be honest with you. So I put on my hacker hat and I said, is there another way? Can I enter this venue without waiting in this super long line? That's what hackers do. They look at a system and they say, most people see the line. A hacker sees what other entrances are there. And I noticed there was a VIP entrance. So my goal now was to enter by the VIP entrance so I could spend some time with my friends. So what I did was I strode right up to the VIP hostess and I said, hi, I'm on the list. Now, of course, I was not on the list, but what I needed her to do was to believe that I was, and I needed her to give me information about who was on the list so I could associate myself with that person or group. Since I wasn't on the list, when she asked what my name was, it wasn't going to be helpful to tell her. So instead of saying my name, when she said, what is your name? I said, well, I'm with the group. And she said, which one? And I said, the big one. She looks down at her clipboard, flips a couple pages, and goes, oh, the Smith party? And I said, bingo, yes, I'm with the Smith party. And with that, she opens the velvet rope, escorts me past the line, and into the bar. When we think like hackers, we look at systems and we say, how can it behave differently than it's supposed to? Her job was to keep people like me out. I should say as an aside, by the way, that I more than made up for that. I mean, I gave her a big tip on the way out. I overtipped the bartenders. I bought drinks for people I saw waiting in line. It's not like I was trying to do anything bad. I just didn't want to wait in line. But I tell that story because it's relatable. We've all waited in line before, and you might not realize that some of the thoughts you already are having are actually thoughts that hackers have. Our second misconception, after we realize we don't want to think like defenders, we want to think like hackers, is that security is not about getting a quote-unquote clean bill of health. People use this phrase all the time. They'll say things like, oh, we just did our security test and we passed with flying colors. What? They'll talk about we have no vulnerabilities in our system. We have this clean bill of health. While that's a noble aspiration, it's not the right goal. The right goal is we need to keep getting better. Security is not about saying you have no vulnerabilities, because you could literally just not look for them and then say you don't have any security flaws. No, it's about getting better. I mean, think about pretty much anything you do in your life, right? You're trying to get better every day. That's what security's like. You want to be better today than you were yesterday, and you want to be better tomorrow than you are today. One of the pieces of research that where people still talk to me about all the time, even though it's, at this point, pretty old, was we were the first company to hack the iPhone when the iPhone first came out. Now, most of us in this room, not you, Lily, but most of us can remember when the iPhone came out. Right? That was like life-changing. It changed society. It changed everything. You had this amazing browsing experience right in your pocket. We wanted to get our hands on one just like everyone else because iPhone's cool. But we also wanted to hack it. And we wanted to be first. The problem is that so did every other security researcher, and most importantly, so did the bad guys. So we didn't really have any sort of advantage over anyone else. But we wanted to be first. So what we did was we started building out some attack scenarios in advance of the release. I mean, we literally had to wait in line, like camping out, like every other idiot who wanted to get a phone that day. That was how we got it. But in advance, we built out these attack scenarios on an assumption. And the assumption was that as Apple was approaching their release date of this transformational technology, they might have to cut a corner or two. And it turns out that our hypothesis proved true. We built some scenarios around the way that Apple might port the desktop browser to the mobile version of the browser. And we were able to actually discover an exploitable flaw that's called buffer overflow. It doesn't matter what it's called, but the outcome is significant in that what it enabled us to do was from our lab in Baltimore, we were able to take over the phone of a New York Times reporter sitting on his desk in Manhattan. He was working with us for a story. We weren't attacking this guy. This was part of a news story. But we were able to gain full administrative control of the device. So we could turn on the camera, turn on the mic, send and receive text messages, add and remove contacts, basically anything you could do with the phone. Now, that was a cool moment for us as an organization, and it was a really cool moment for the security research community in general. But the story's not about us. The story is about Apple and what Apple did in response. At that time, in 2007, the way that a lot of organizations thought about security researchers was that we're the opponent. And a lot of security researchers at the time were actually getting sued for stuff like this. And instead of trying to belittle or negate what we were doing, Apple fixed it. Within 48 hours, they had a patch issued that fixed this flaw. So the millions of people who wound up buying iPhone that fateful September in 2007 were now safe from this particular flaw. And that's a tremendous example of the way that we all should be thinking about security. Is how can we keep getting better every day? What are the things we're doing today that are going to make us better at defense tomorrow? Mindset misconception number 3. Security is not just a technical issue. I won't call anybody out on this, but I would bet that some of you in this room think that's a computer's thing. IT has it. But it's not. It's not just a technical issue. Security is a leadership issue. It does not matter how smart, how capable, how well-resourced, how competent the people in charge of security are at your organization. If the top levels of the company don't, first of all, understand security, and second of all, support it, they'll never be able to succeed in the security mission. I mean, look at any of the major breach headlines where a CEO, a CTO, a CIO, or a CISO were fired as a result of the breach. That right there is the market saying, yeah, this is security is a leadership issue. There was this thing that happened once with one of our customers that we were working with where they were building this pretty cool medical device. It's what's called a drug infusion pump, and it literally injects morphine into your spine. And what they were having us investigate for them was how likely someone could hurt or potentially kill a patient. And so this was work that was really meaningful. It really mattered, because if this is going to be used on patients, we need to make sure that it's safe. And so at the conclusion of the project, we found a number of ways that, yes, actually you could really hurt patients. You could overdose them, which when you're talking about a drug in your spine, that's pretty bad. And so here we are in this really big conference room with the whole leadership team of this company. We're walking them through all the different attack scenarios, and the CEO interrupts. And he says, "It's just not as bad as you're saying." Now, we paused to hear what he was getting at. And he used this metaphor that I will, for the rest of my life, remember and probably use wherever I can. He said, "Ted, I drive a BMW. I love that car. I would never want to see it get scratched. Now, theoretically, someone could haul a piano up onto the roof of our building, throw it off the building onto my car, and destroy my car. Theoretically, that could happen. But I'm just not worried about it." I am quite literally in the profession of expecting the unexpected, and I was speechless in response to that. I mean, we literally just showed him all these ways that people could be hurt by his product. And his reaction was to try to minimize and to marginalize what was happening. Needless to say, if that's the way that leadership is thinking about security, it does not matter how capable the security team is. It does not matter how capable the developers are. They're just not going to be able to execute the mission. The Food and Drug Administration, which is who approves use of medical devices on patients, did not really like this company's approach to security and denied their application for that approval. And if you can't treat patients with a medical device, you go out of business. Now, I don't celebrate that failure. That was a real bummer. I mean, our job as security consultants is to help people get better, and that we were really disappointed by that. I don't even really like telling this story, to be honest, but I think it's an important one for us to remember because it helps us realize that security really starts with leadership, including especially leadership who would not consider themselves technical. All right, so we talked about there's these two components. We change the way that we think so that we can change the way that we behave. So let's talk about how we can implement better tactics. So the first misconception that comes to how we actually approach security is this. People will always say, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough resources. And those things are true and will always be true. And yes, you want to get more time, you want to get more money, you want to get more everything. But that's not where you need to start. What you need is what's called a threat model. So it's not necessarily about how do you defend against everybody all the time. It's about how do you defend against what matters. So a threat model, people in the security community often are confused about what it is. So I'll explain what it is briefly using a metaphor. So here we are in Dallas, right? And this incredible football crazy town. The whole state's pretty crazy about football, actually. And we think about, I want to say my team, I want to say the New England Patriots, but I won't. We're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. How do the Dallas Cowboys prepare for whoever they're going to play that weekend? They scout them. Every week, they're analyzing what are the weaknesses and the strengths of their opponents. And how do those strengths and weaknesses compare to their own strengths and weaknesses? And then they build a game plan for how they're going to play that game against that opponent that week, because they are now matched up accordingly. That's kind of what a threat model is like. A threat model helps you understand what it is that you're actually trying to do. And a threat model helps you understand where to invest time, effort, money, and resources. It really helps us answer 3 critically important questions. The first question, what do I want to defend? So these are what's called assets. They might be tangible things like money or data, corporate information, or they might be intangible things like reputation of your brand. You don't want to be the company in the news headlines. Those are all things that you think about that you might want to defend, and you have to prioritize them. What's the most important? The second question that it helps answer is, who do we want to defend against? Now, the idea of quote-unquote hackers, we're painting a broad brush to talk about everybody, but every different group of hackers is motivated by different reasons. So, of course, those of us from the ethical hacking community, we're motivated to improve the security of systems. Some attackers are motivated to make money. Some are motivated to gain a geopolitical advantage. Some are motivated to just prove they can do it. And how those different groups are motivated in the context of what you have that you might want to protect determines who's going to attack an organization. And then the third question is, where will I be attacked? So this is the collection of what's called attack surfaces, which are areas that a company could be attacked. Login fields, input fields, things like that. Once we can understand the combination of these 3 factors, now we know where to invest time, effort, money, and resources. So this is a very practical, actionable thing that anyone can do back at their organization to figure out, where am I going to spend my limited person power, my limited time, my limited money? For any of you who are interested in this idea, I have a ton of collateral that I can send you that does a team exercise, so you can actually walk your team through it, or just call me. I'll just tell you how to do it. But there's tons of resources that I can provide you to show you tactically how to do this. Misconception number 2 has to do with security testing. There's a term in the security community called penetration testing. If you're familiar with it, I don't need to explain it to you, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, essentially it speaks to how organizations try to find their security flaws by having someone try to hack the system. And they're often asking for this by this name, penetration test. But the problem is that the term has become so grossly misused that it almost means nothing anymore. So maybe you're actively going through a penetration test on behalf of a customer of yours, or maybe you're asking vendors of yours to do it. The question is, are you doing the right thing? Not all security testing is the same. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that this critical part of any security program that is assessing a system for its weaknesses, we need to make sure that it's well aligned to what you're trying to do. So, how do we do that? I'm a metaphor guy. I can try to explain the different approaches using a metaphor of cars. So here's the problem statement in summary, is that many organizations are asking for this specific thing. Penetration testing means a very specific thing. But they're usually being sold something else. They're usually being sold a vulnerability scan, but it's being presented as a penetration test. If you were to go Google that term right now, almost everything that you would see in your search results would be this. It would not be a penetration test, it would be a vulnerability scan. But the problem is that what most people need is something else altogether. It's called a vulnerability assessment. So these all sound kind of the same, right? They're confusing terms. Why do I care? So let me try to explain what they are. Penetration testing is kind of like when the car maker wants to know, how does the car perform in a specific crash scenario? For example, a head-on collision. What do? They crash the car into the wall. And they see what happens. They measure the results. So they're taking a built system. It's already been through a lot of testing. And they're measuring the outcome of this specific scenario. That's what penetration testing is like. You take a built system, it's already been through a lot of security testing, and you're evaluating for a very specific thing. But when you're sold vulnerability scanning, It's kind of like, instead of the crash test, it's kind of like when the check engine light comes on in your car. You go to the mechanic, they stick that little thing under the dash, it interrogates the computer, and it says, here's how you turn the check engine light off. Useful service, pretty different, right? That's why this is a problem, is that people are like, hey, can you take my proverbial car and see how it performs in this crash situation? And people are like, yep, I turned off the check engine light for you. It just doesn't line up to what the goal was. But what makes that even further confusing is that what people typically need is vulnerability scanning is essentially looking for a series of known issues, right? It's an automated tool. It scans. It says, this issue is known to exist. Does that exist in this system? But what they really need is usually vulnerability assessments. And vulnerability assessments, instead of the crash test or the diagnostic scan, it's more like the whole automotive safety department. And what does the automotive safety department do? They consider the car holistically. They think about, how do the airbags work with the side impact beams, work with the lane departure technology. That's kind of what vulnerability assessments are like. It's looking at a system and thinking about all the different components to it and thinking about the unique ways that system might be attacked. Thinking about the very custom exploits that might exist against that particular scenario. So what do I want you to do with this? Do I want you to take notes and memorize it? I mean, yes, I would like people to use the right terms, but I think that battle is lost. I think people are already, even if you walked out of here 100% of you using the right term, other people wouldn't outside of this room. So what we need to do is start with the goal. We need to understand what it is we want to achieve and then make sure that the approach that we are pursuing aligns to it. So if you have a built system, it's already been through a ton of testing already, and you want to investigate a specific scenario, pen testing is pretty good. If you want a quick, inexpensive investigation of issues that are known to exist, scanning is probably a good thing to do. And if you want a more holistic view on the complete system and all the different ways it might be attacked, the custom severity, custom exploits, you probably want a vulnerability assessment. The final misconception has to do with what actually happened. So a lot of people will always ask me after I get on a stage or meet them, wherever I meet them, they're like, but how does it work? So I'm going to share with you one story about how an attacker actually compromises a system. The common misconception that people will have is this love that everybody has for automation. I get it. I love automation. I want, when I walk into my house, my lights to turn on to a very specific warmth. I want my music to start playing. I want that kind of automation. I mean, it's not that hard to flip a switch, but I want it. I want automation. It makes my life easier. And people want that with every piece of technology that anyone is building for anyone. And so they try to rely on these automated scanners that I just mentioned that are kind of like the diagnostic check. And scanners are really, really useful. They help you identify the proverbial low-hanging fruit, the things that the attacker will find right away, right out the gate as well. But in fact, we can't scan our way to security excellence. What instead we need are advanced tactics. Now, I put a little asterisk here because it depends on whether or not you have something worth protecting. Now, that's an important assumption. If you don't have something worth protecting, you don't need to invest money and effort and resources to protect it. I mean, if you have a blog that has some great pancake recipes on it, I don't think you need to spend a lot of money or time or effort protecting that. But if you have access to financials, access to information, access to customer data, access to the availability of your systems, that might be worth protecting. And if that's worth protecting, that's worth making sure that we go beyond the basics. So there are many advanced tactics. I'm just going to explain one of them, just to give a peek behind the curtain of how it works. But let's start with a metaphor. And let's try to explain this using an analog example. Who loves trampolines? Yes, I do too. I would want to go on a trampoline right now. Everyone loves trampolines, even if you didn't raise your hand. I remember growing up, one of my neighbors had a trampoline. And I was there all the time. I mean, everyone loves jump on a trampoline, right? And I vividly remember the day we discovered the double jump. Have you done a double jump yet? I don't know if you're going to want to do it. It's really scary. You seem brave, though. Double jump is when you time your jump so that as my friend is landing, I'm taking off. And what happens, the physics of it, are that his downward velocity actually amplifies my upward velocity. Now, we discovered this because there are some tree branches that hang over his trampoline that seemed like impossibly high, and I hit them. I mean, it was to like this boom thingy, and I hit them with my head and experienced this moment of weightlessness, and then I came speeding, crashing down to earth, thought I was gonna die. It was terrifying. And that was the day when I discovered that combining two or more things actually has exponentially impact more so than either of those things alone. Right? I can only jump so high, and my friend can only jump so high, but with the double jump, I could hit the tree branches. So what does that mean in a technical sense? Well, there is this technique that's called exploit chaining. Exploit chaining is where an attacker will combine multiple things in order to create a more severe outcome than either of those things alone. So one such example is where we were looking at a system that had two flaws to it. The first flaw is what's called information leakage. Terms don't matter, but I'll define it anyway. Information leakage is essentially when a system gives up information that it shouldn't. In this case, it meant that any user of the system could obtain the user identifier of any other user of the system. Now, that's not directly exploitable. You actually can't do anything with that. You just don't want it to happen. But that was the first issue, information leakage. The second issue is what's called broken authorization. Now, authorization is where a system verifies your permission to do something. Like, are you allowed to access something or to do something? And when we say it's broken, that means that it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. In this case, the element that was broken was how you change credentials. So we've all been through the experience of changing a password before, and oftentimes you have to supply information. You have to supply the current password in order to change to a new password, right? We've all experienced that at some point. So this system also required you to supply some information, but it didn't require you to supply the password. It required you to supply your user identifier. In theory, everyone only knows their own user identifier. When you combine the two, it becomes catastrophic. Because now it means that any user of the system can get the user identifier for every other user of the system, and then use those user identifiers to change every single person's password. That means the attacker would control every account in the entire system. That's what we call complete account takeover. It's the worst possible scenario you can have, because now it means the attacker can do whatever they want with the whole system. This is only possible because a human looked at this and said, can I connect these dots? This really mattered to this organization, right? And there's no scanner, there's no way you could automate trying to apply that level of human intelligence of saying, could I combine two things that are exponentially more impactful than either of those things alone? Everything that we talked about today comes from a book that I wrote called Hackable. So everything we talked about is in there. All the actionable steps, everything you could possibly need to do to go next is from that book. I had a bunch of them for you guys. They did not arrive. So, Ted was saying we have to expect the unexpected. I did not expect to not be able to hand you books today. I was going to sign them for you. It was going to be really fun, but I still want to get books in your hand. So on the last slide, I'm going to have a QR code on there. And if you just hit that with your phone, it'll take you to a link where you just put in your mailing information, and I'm going to send you signed copies. I think I have like a couple hundred or something. So the first however many people till those are gone, I'm going to send them to you. So no cost. This is my gift to you guys because I think these ideas matter. I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to communicate ideas. This stuff matters. What you guys do matters, and my hope is that the ideas you've learned today will help you be able to build better, more secure systems. pass the baton to you. Ideas are only as good as the action we take on those ideas. So I implore you, go back to your organization and talk about what you've learned today. Remember these two components. We first have to change the way that we think in order to be able to change the way that we behave. When we do those things, we're going to be able to build better, more secure systems. So here's the do different. Here's how you go back to your organization and do something. First, we change our mind. There's 3 things we want to do that we talked about today. We want to think like a hacker, right? We want to be the contrarian. We want to be committed to a worthy goal that matters. We want to be creative. We want to look at the system and say, hey, instead of waiting in the line, is there a VIP access? We want to make sure that the goal is to get better. The goal is not to just be comfortable with the fact that we have a clean bill of health. The goal is to continually improve. That's what security is about. It's a process of improvement. And we want to make sure that we understand and prioritize security as a leadership issue. Once we do those things, then we can implement some tangible tactics. The first is we want to make sure we establish or update, if you have one already, a threat model. A threat model helps us understand where we're going to invest time, effort, money, and resources. We want to make sure that we're getting the right testing aligned to whatever your goal is. Security testing is a critical component of any security program, but not all security testing is created the same. And then finally, if you have something worth protecting, we want to make sure that we go beyond the basics. We have to get the advanced tactics. We have to think like the hacker thinks, and that means we have to do those things like exploit chaining and the many other things that you would learn about if you read the book. So, everything that you learned today, oh, here's the QR code, by the way. The principles you learned today are how ethical hackers keep secure the software systems that every single one of us rely on in our life every day. If these systems and these principles work for them, they'll work for you too. Thank you. I do have a few minutes if anyone has a burning question that you'd like me to answer. Free consulting on the spot. Let's go. Who's brave? Go ahead. I have not been asked that question yet, and this is the best question I've ever received in a conference. Ever. The question was, in that exploit chaining story, how old was the other person on the trampoline? I think we were probably about 10. How old are you? You're turning 9 on Friday? All right, we'll go find a trampoline, and we'll double jump. How old is... That's a great question. What a good way to start. Okay, come on, someone's got to follow that. I mean, that's pretty awesome. All right, well, I will hang out in the lobby in the back. I would love to talk to any of you. All my information is here, and it's been a real pleasure being with you guys. So thank you so much.